Hello and welcome to Camera Review. Today we are having an awesome news, which is the announcement of Panasonic's S1H. For those who may know their lineup of S1 cameras, they have had S1, S1R, and now S1H. And S1H is a very specific camera designed for videographers, and I haven't said filmmakers because filmmaker and videography here kind of blends and blurs the lines. And this is why I wanted to give you a perspective of a director of photography. I've done a lot of movies in different types of cameras. Mostly I use the Reds and other ones, but the ones that I have really fallen in love with are the looks that I have gained from different types of cameras that are basically designed for video but can be enhanced to have a great look. And that all began with the GH4. If those of you may remember, you could have an external recorder to record pretty decent footage, and then if you had the proper lenses, you could do an anamorphic look, which is a widescreen, and it gave you this incredible quality. And the reason that people fell in love with it is that you could do both video and you could try your hand at making films. And films, of course, are a very unique category of specialty because it requires that you understand angles, light, the shaping of lights, how the cameras operate. And what happens is at that stage is a lot of factors come in, and it is a lot to handle for a lot of people. And that is why a lot of people who bought the GH4 went in the direction of doing weddings and shooting music videos for really dirt cheap prices, and they got their money's worth. And that is what started the revolution of video. And what we are seeing is this gradual evolution that has been happening with their lineup, and Panasonic has been playing a catch-up right now, and I tell you why in a minute. Because what has happened is the GH4 broke the market, and then when the GH5 came out, people were all excited because it offered more functionality. You could do better internal recording, and the image quality looked fantastic. And for those of you who are doing for example, YouTube videos or videos for weddings or simple things that are for commercial reasons that don't cost a whole bunch of money, this is a great way to get a money return on your investments. So what happened is that we had the announcement of S1, and S1 came in a very unusual time in the market because when you look at the S1, it has a very special look that mimics the look of like a S camera, but yet it has a very different feel, different way of operation. It has a very good full frame sensor, yet it suffered the same things that GH1 had, because when you look at the GH1, you had issues with like autofocus, you had limitations with the V-Log, and a whole bunch of other things. Now, what has happened, and the reason I've told this story is when the S1H came out, it tried to eliminate a lot of those things that people were unhappy about. People wanted to shoot a higher frame rate, they wanted to get much better image quality, and also they wanted to see if they could do 4K up to 6K, and that became a very important thing. And now a lot of people are thinking, oh my god, I go shoot 6K, I don't need anything else. Well, there is a lot more that goes into a 6K than a normal 6K. And what I mean by that is if you look at your smartphone, some of the smartphones shoot 4K. So how can you get that much information into that small chip and be able to obtain such a high good quality? And what would happen if the smartphone started shooting 6K? It tells you that you can shoot 6K, it just means how much information you're processing. In processing that information and how much data you have is going to give you that leverage of, first of all, the dynamic range, the colors, and everything else that makes that image cinematic or unique. So if your aim is making film, then you have to give a serious consideration of whether this camera is the right camera to invest in, because it comes at a much higher price range than previous cameras at $4,000. Yes, you heard it right, $4,000. And the reason that is because it's being a camera for a lot of purposes. So you could take this camera and shoot weddings with it and get 24 megapixel images that's going to look very good, and yet be able to film while you have the procession of the wedding going and the wedding party. It gives you that versatility, but also it's also going to give you some other options. What are those options? You got about 42 different types of formats that you can shoot in. You can get the 6K, 5.94, you can get some slow motion. But at the end of the day, when you look at those numbers, you're going to find very interesting things. And that is what I want to talk about. Now, firstly, let's talk about the 6K. What does 6K mean? 6K means it's just a wide format, but you could compress that information, and the information that you get for post-processing will be very, very small. And by small, I'm comparing to larger cameras that are out in the market. As you know, we have had a lot of cameras that are professional cameras that are costing $80,000, $100,000, even higher. And the reason they are so expensive is that the data that they contain has a lot of dynamic range, a lot of information, and it can be manipulated in a post to create this very cinematic look. So what we are expecting a $4,000 camera to do, what an $80,000 camera can do, is a very different thing. And where that comes is the amount of information that's being processed. Now, you might think 6K is the highest amount of information that this camera has to be putting out. Well, it's not quite like that. If you look at the spec sheet, what you're going to find is a very interesting information. The information is going to show you that not only does it shoot in different formats like 1:1, 2:1, 3:2, 4:3, and 16:9, and all this other formats, what you're going to find is that this format at 6K 3:2 ratio is going to give you about 200 megabits per second. So that might sound like a lot if you compare it to maybe 3 years ago. But what is interesting is that this camera actually puts out a lot more information when it's shooting 4K. So you might be thinking, hold on a minute, why is it shooting 6K and putting out only 200 megabits when if you're shooting 4K, you can go up to 400. Now, the reason is that the amount of information that you're processing is very different. And the amount of processing that if you try to do that 6K in the way that the 4K is recording, what you will have is a 800 or a 1200 megabits per second. And that kind of information can only be handled with much bigger cameras, with much better fan systems, and all this stuff comes into play. So what you're doing is you're making some compromises, and those compromises are the ones that are going to define how this camera is going to operate. So let me give you that information. If you look at the back of this camera, you're going to find these vents that are for the fan, and there's a kind of like an indentation that protrudes, and the way they kind of managed it is that you can flip out the screen, use it different ways, which by the way is designed for videographers to enjoy themselves while they film. What you find is that they got a big fan in there, and it makes quite a noise. And if you look at that noise, you might be thinking, how come this is making so much noise? Because so much information is being pushed through that processing system, and those things create heat. So that is why what you'll find is that there are going to be limitations to what this camera can do in terms of recordings on board. So if you are thinking that you just press it on and you record it, you might get some fan noise if it's a quiet environment. So in that respect, what we're having in this situation is, what are we going to do with that? And that means you have to go with external recorder or mic recorders and then record internal into the audio system. And that means quite a lot of hookups. Or you could record separately and record that information so that you are able to match it in the post. So what you're doing is you're kind of compromising in the way that it operates, because in the past you had practically no noise on the GH5 and other ones, but you're having a little bit more noise that is going to be in there without you noticing it at first. But as you use it and you go, what is that sound? You're going to find that sound is there. Now, that is not really a drawback if you are into making professional quality videos. What I mean by professional quality is not those things that you put on a gimbal and you walk around and you film somebody and they look good and they do a couple of dance moves and you call it a music video. That is not a music video if you're thinking about it. It's just just a video that you did. Then it has no per se creative quality. What you're doing with creative quality is you have to take the image, you have to be able to process it in a way that looks appealing and looks different. And more importantly than that, you have to be able to take that information and make it look as if it was shot in a much higher quality camera. If you look at the settings that is in there, and if you're not using Vlog, which is a flat profile, you're going to have all this video-ish look. And if you're happy with that video-ish look, that's very fine, but your iPhone can do that. So what it means is that you are able to capture a look that is very good. You're going to have shallower depth of field, and you're going to have a lot more capabilities. You're recording on a bigger frame. What I mean by that is bigger sensor. And, all that stuff is coming in. But at the end of the day, what is the quality of the image? Now, if you have gone out there and watched a whole bunch of S1H videos and look at what they have done and the video quality, you're going to find that if you put a smaller, cheaper lens on it, those lenses are not going to give you that cinematic look. And once you slap on a cinematic lens, now the game changes. But then you're looking at much now higher numbers. You're thinking about $4, $5, even $10, $12,000 of decent size lens, and those are probably prime lenses that you need to slap on. Now you're going to ask yourself, well, if I can afford all those lenses, how come I can afford a much more capable camera? And that's where it's in a gray zone. It's between a video camera and a film camera in the way that it has the potential to provide film-like quality. And that is what is important for those who are doing film. Film means that you are going to do directing, you're going to do the DP work, you're going to be able to see how you can create a shot that looks interesting and pleasing to the senses. And that is not just going, opening your lens wide open and then trying to get some kind of a bokeh in the background that doesn't tell a story, which I've seen it done tremendously, and it is driving me nuts, because what's happening is you're losing the storytelling aspect because you're not including what the background is. You're not telling the story in a way that is interesting. So what has to happen is that you have to understand that there's going to be a big learning curve when you get into this camera. And when that learning curve comes in, you have to be familiar with the buttons. Of course, the buttons have been improved, the way the layout is perfected, the way that this camera is designed to handle some of the previous generation things that we were not so happy about, especially with the GH4 and GH5. We're seeing a new evolution, and the evolution that comes with the development of this new camera brings in this question: what can I do to create an image that is going to give me an advantage? And that advantage is something that you need to look into. What is it that you're trying to do? If your aim is to get your money out of it, well, I tell you, as a wedding photographer's, videographer's camera, this is probably one of the best, because you're going to get very high quality image and a lot easier way of processing that information. Because if you look at the codec that's used, that is the way the information is stored, it is designed to be edited in a comfortable, easy manner. So if you put it on your laptop, you're going to be able to get that information. What you will find, though, is that when you put an anamorphic lens and do de-squeezing, which I think has been done beautifully by Panasonic, because it created a whole new possibility where you didn't have to spend $60,000-$70,000 and then get an ARRI camera, but you could do it on this. So what's going to happen is you're going to have this new window of opportunity that you can exploit. And what I mean by that is no longer are you stuck with 24 frames or 48 frames. You can actually go much higher. And that is what is interesting, is because you're going to see that if you shoot 422 10-bit, you still can get 24. But if you drop the quality just a little bit and go to 8-bit, well, that's when it gets interesting, because then you are also going to have drop in the file size, which is going to be 100 megabits, and that means that you can record in a much longer period, and you'll be able to capture images. And what you'll find is that over the period of time that you use this, you're going to probably experiment with different ways of using this camera and seeing what codecs works, what vlog works, and maybe you may just say, I'm happy with 709 and it's nice, and we just do it that way. But if you are into filming, that is when it's going to make a big difference, because if your video, even if you're shooting weddings, looks like a cinematic image because the way you shot it, that is going to separate your business in the market from everybody else's. And that is what a crucial thing about it is. If you're investing $4,000, you should have an advantage over a much older camera like the GH4 or GH5. If you can't discern the difference, that's when you have a problem, because everybody's going to shoot 23.97 or 24 frames. The difference is how that image is going to look. If you put a GH5 next to this one and you can't tell the difference after editing, then you have a problem. Now, that's one thing that I have to point out. In the previous version, which is the GH5, if you look at the codec that's used in the vlog, it has some limitations. But when you go up to this, it gives you the full range. So you're going to get a little bit more dynamic range. You're going to get a little bit more flexibility. Yet it's going to have limitations. So you have to know how to light properly. You have to know that you can push this camera to a certain level and not beyond. Which brings me to another important point, which is the ISO performance. ISO performance, now you have dual thing that is going on. If you put it the vlog, you're going to 640, that's going to start. You can go down to 100 on different settings, but that is what I'm going to talk about, is because when you push this camera up to 4,000 and above, you are going to see this noise creep in. And how is that going to affect the way you're going to film? If you're, for example, filming a wedding in the evening, or if you're doing something that you require a lot more light, because you are going to lose a lot of the dynamic range. So that is when it comes important to know that your camera's capabilities are. And this is where it's going to make a huge difference on the way that you operate this camera, because if you are using vlog, using anamorphic, you put a great lens on it and you have proper lighting, well, that is going to shine. But if you don't know any of those and one of those elements is lacking, you're going to have issues. Now, doesn't mean that you have to shoot in anamorphic. You can shoot it in regular lenses and you don't have to do de-squeezing. But again, what we're talking about is film. A film requires you to have all the other elements. It's not just lens, it's just not the camera, it is the lights as well. So if you know how to light, if you know how to use it, and if you put the right codec, if you know how to edit a little bit, then you have a chance. But beyond that, it's a little bit difficult. And what I also like, which has not been mentioned, I have talked to a lot of people about, is the external recording. Now, external recording has come back in a different way, because you're going to see the 10-bit 422 recording of DCI. Now, a lot of people have missed this because the DCI is 4096 and the other, which is the UHD, is 3840. So what you're having is this difference. DCI is the cinema standard. This is what you want to have if you're doing 4K cinema. And that's what's demanded. If you are doing that, you're going to need as much latitude for editing. That 10-bit, it will make a lot of difference, especially in the shadows. If you look in, like, for example, gradation of tones, you're going to see, for example, in the 8-bit, you'll see have all these like different kind of lines appearing in the shadows when it's supposed to be smooth. That's the 10-bit difference, and 422 is going to give you that. A lot of people don't know what 422 is, which I'll explain in a different video, but that is what the difference is. And also you're going to see that you will find this camera is a very decent slow motion capable camera when you're doing slow motion, but that slow motion still 1080p is not enough. HD is not enough. You want to be able to do a much higher rate, which brings me to the question of what will you do when compare it to Blackmagic, because Blackmagic, as you know, has come up with the 6K, and this is just a follow-up. So if you put both of these cameras and the prices together, that is going to create some differences. Now, the differences is the image quality, the way it looks, the codecs that are used, how it's being processed, and if it's a worthwhile investment. Now, all those things I will discuss in the next coming up video, where I will compare these two cameras and what makes sense from a filming perspective, and we'll also have a look at it from a photographic point of view. But what I want to leave you with the idea is this camera is a very good camera for a videographer. If you are going to make an investment into a camera like this, know the reasons why you're buying it, because if you're buying it just because it's a new gear and you're a gearaholic, then it is not the right investment. But if you're buying it knowing that you can get your money out of it on a professional reasons, then this is a camera that has a lot of versatility, because you're taking still images, you're doing slow-mo, you got a little bit more latitude in terms of getting that slow motion and also the dynamic range. So it's giving you that beautiful, warm feeling of being able to use it for video, as well as a little bit about the film. So that is what you should be considering. Now, I provide a lot of links down below. There are some articles that will be coming out. Please do follow that up. And also, please watch my next video that will be coming up on comparison to Blackmagic 6K. And I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in our next review.